Hi everybody. This is the lecture to accompany Chapter 6 in your textbook. I highly recommend you read Chapter 6 as there are a lot of things in it that I don't have time to get to today. Okay, let's talk about nonverbal communication, also known as body language. Now, why do we call it body language? Is it really language? Well, no, it's not. We talked about language in Chapter 5, but nonverbal communication is a very powerful form of communication because it's the behaviors and characteristics that convey meaning over and above the use of words. So when we are talking about nonverbal communication, some nonverbal communication behaviors accompany words. In other words, they are the things that we do that go along with the language that we're using. However, other nonverbal communication behaviors convey meaning all on their own and are separate from any words that we use. We're going to talk about that as well. There are 5 characteristics of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication first is present in most interpersonal conversations, definitely in face-to-face, but even in more channel-lean contexts like a phone call or an email. So in a phone call, it might be the tone of voice or pauses, and in an email, it might be the use of emoticons, or maybe if you're angry, you talk in all caps, that kind of thing. You can often tell how people are feeling and maybe even what they're thinking by their use of nonverbal communication. Sometimes you can tell the pecking order, so to speak, when you walk into a room by how people are dressed, where they're sitting, etc. People who can't use one or more of their senses, like hearing or sight, often depend heavily on nonverbal signals to understand the message. Also, nonverbal communication often conveys more information than verbal communication. According to the text, up to 70% of our meaning is transmitted nonverbally, and the rest is transmitted through the language or the words that we use. That's because there are more nonverbal channels of communication than verbal channels of communication. So what are the nonverbal channels? They're the things we're going to talk about later, like eye contact, what we do with our face, hearing, smelling, touching. Those kinds of things give us clues as to the real meaning. Verbal channels of communication are simply either hearing spoken words or reading written words. So we rely on clues when talking isn't a particularly good option. For instance, if you walk into a room and you see someone and you look at their face and their posture and you just know that they are not in the mood to talk, just from their facial expression and how they are sitting or standing. The third thing is that nonverbal communication is usually believed over verbal communication. What do you believe when you're talking to someone? What they say or how they are saying it? We actually end up believing their nonverbal communication because our instinct tells us that it's harder to control nonverbal behavior, and so it is more likely an accurate reflection of a person's true feelings. For instance, if you ask a friend, "So, how are you feeling today?" and they look at you, they roll their eyes, stick their hand on their hip, and they say, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine." Are they really fine? Unlikely, right? If you just believe the words that they say, that they are fine, you would think that they were. But because all their nonverbal communication is saying the exact opposite of that, that is what you are more likely to believe. Fourth, nonverbal communication is the primary means of communicating emotion. We can generally tell how a person is feeling more through nonverbal means. We are very visually oriented creatures, so we pay close attention to each other's faces and bodies when communicating with them. And most basic emotions are interpreted similarly across cultures. For instance, a smile means the same thing the entire world over. We also pay attention to how people say things, what volume they use, the pitch, to determine what they are feeling. And finally, nonverbal communication is meta-communicative. Nonverbal communication is communication about communication. It's the main thing that tells us how to interpret a message. For instance, if I walk up to you, cup my hand to your ear, and whisper into your ear, I'm probably telling you a secret. If I say something and then wink at you, I'm probably kidding. So what do we use nonverbal communication for? Well, a lot of things. First, we use it to manage conversations. And by managing, I mean starting, maintaining them, and ending them. If you want to start a conversation with someone, you would walk up to them, kind of get into their personal space, make eye contact with them, smile at them. To maintain a conversation, in order to take turns in the conversation, you might pause to let the other person know you want them to speak, smile, nod to continue the conversation, and end a conversation by a change in posture, eye contact, or maybe if you didn't want to be there in the first place, looking at your watch or your cell phone to give that other person the clue that maybe you're done. Nonverbal communication is used to express emotions. When we talk specifically about emotions in a later chapter, we'll get into this more, but facial expressions often can convey emotion, and vocal expressions can convey emotion. Definitely, you can use your voice to show happiness, anger, fear. We use nonverbal communication to maintain relationships. What do you do when you're attracted to someone? Well, you know how to flirt, don't you? You use immediacy behaviors, make eye contact, get closer to that person. Your vocal expression can change, smiling, that kind of thing, maybe even touching, to show interest or to maintain an already established relationship. We use nonverbal communication to form impressions of others. Our impressions or perceptions of people are very strongly influenced by their nonverbal behaviors. So we see demographic impressions like age, gender, ethnicity, a person's physical appearance, and maybe some socio-cultural impressions, things that cue us into someone's status and prestige, or maybe the culture or co-cultures that they identify with. And we use it to influence others. Just like we make judgments about other people through their nonverbal cues, we attempt to manage our identity, how others perceive us, by our nonverbal behaviors. So we use it to establish our credibility. For example, what nonverbal things add to your credibility at a job interview? It's not just what you say, it's the clothing you wear, your hair, makeup if you use it, your eye contact, smiling, sitting up straight, being on time. All those things, which are nonverbal, add to your credibility. And we use nonverbal behavior to conceal information. We do often use it to be deceptive and hide things about ourselves. And as we see in chapter 12, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be difficult to do because, as I said before, it's harder to control our nonverbal behavior than our words. So a fake smile is going to be somewhat different from a real smile, and our pitch tends to rise when we're concealing information, among other clues. But we are often successful, which is why we keep doing it. So now we're going to talk about the 10 channels of nonverbal communication, and some of them are fairly obvious. Others might be quite surprising to you. The first is probably the most obvious, and that is facial displays, what we do with our face. There's something called the principle of facial primacy, and this says that the face communicates more information than any other communication channel. For one thing, it communicates who we are. It communicates our identity. Individual faces set us apart from everyone else on the planet. It's the primary way you communicate your identity to other people. That's why we use pictures on our ID to prove who we are. Then it communicates our level of attractiveness. Now, across cultures, there's remarkable similarity as to what constitutes attractiveness. And those two things are symmetry and proportionality. Symmetry is how even the two different sides of your face are. No one is perfectly symmetrical, but Denzel Washington and Elizabeth Hurley actually are almost perfect if you want to look them up. Proportionality has to do with the size of your facial features relative to each other. So if we generally all find the same things attractive, why do we say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Possibly because physical attractiveness is not the only measure of what attracts us to someone. And of course, as we said before, emotion is mostly, but not completely, conveyed through faces. Another channel is eye behaviors. Yes, eyes are part of our face, but they're a very special part. The eyes do most of the nonverbal communication in your face. The term oculesics means the study of eye behavior. And so things like honesty, attraction, sincerity can be conveyed through eye contact. We can use our eyes to show confidence or even to intimidate someone. Then movements and gestures. Movement and gestures say a lot about us, and we can use them to say things without words. Kinesics is the study of these kinds of body movements known as gesticulation. There are a couple of different ways in which we use body movements to convey information. The first way is by using gestures as emblems. Emblems are gestures that have direct verbal translation. So if you put your hand out with your palm forward, that is the hand gesture for stop. You don't have to say stop. It has a direct verbal translation. Then there are things called illustrators, which are gestures that accompany a verbal message to help clarify it. So if you're talking about the fish you caught and it said it was this big and you use your hands, that illustrates or helps someone like me who uses gestures as a major part of my lectures. I use them all the time. Then there are affect displays, which communicate emotion. So if you wring your hands when you're nervous, or you cover your mouth when you're surprised or delighted, those are affect displays. Then there are things called regulators, which control the flow of conversation. Raising your hand to get somebody to call on you, maybe me pointing at you, or someone holding up a hand so they can finish their thought. That is regulation of the conversation. And then adapters are things that you just do with your hands to satisfy some personal need, like scratching an itch. So all those things communicate information to somebody else. Then there is touch. The study of touch is known as haptics. It is an extremely important means of communicating nonverbally, and as I said in the first chapter, it's actually critical to our survival. So there are 5 ways in which we use touch. The first one is affectionate touch. Obviously, touch is one of the major ways we show affection to each other. It's incredibly important to our development as humans. It's also unfortunate that this need for affectionate touch can be abused by sexual predators, because it's such a powerful need. So because of this, we have become kind of a hands-off society, which may reduce instances of sexual abuse, but some researchers have begun to think there may be more harm than good to come from this. I had a teacher friend who was a high school teacher who was basically blacklisted from teaching because he put his arm around one of his female teenage students who was crying, attempting to comfort her, ended up getting fired because of that. So that's the kind of thing where, you're trying to use touch to help somebody and it kind of backfires on you. The second type of touch is caregiving touch. Receiving or giving care or service. So when do people touch you in this way? Well, when you get a haircut, you get your teeth cleaned or some dental work, you go to the doctor, you have a massage, you have a baby, you're changing their diapers. Now, you may or may not feel affection for that person, like changing a baby's diaper, for example. If it's your baby, obviously that's also going to be affectionate touch. But that's not the main purpose of this kind of touch. Then there's power and control touch. And this is used to exert power over another's behavior. Now, this can be used for helpful or necessary purposes, like holding someone's arm to help them walk, holding down a person who's tried to harm someone, but it can also be used to exert negative control over someone. And then there is aggressive touch, which is touch that is intentionally done to inflict physical harm, such as pushing, slapping. Now, this is usually a criminal act in the United States. I mean, we have battery, domestic violence laws, but not necessarily in other cultures or other countries. And then finally, ritualistic touch, which is part of a custom or tradition. Typical greetings between people in different cultures. Some sports involve body-to-body contact, and it might be aggressive, but strict rules tend to apply to such ritualistic touch. Another channel of nonverbal communication is vocal behaviors or vocalics. These are aspects of how you use your voice that convey meaning. So the way you speak, not just the words you speak, but the way you say them is certainly connected to the language, but they're also considered a part of nonverbal communication. And so pitch, which is how high or low your voice is on the musical scale, can be used to convey meaning. Inflection, your variation in pitch. You've heard of the term monotone. That's someone who doesn't change the pitch at all of their speaking. Volume, how loud or soft your voice is, can certainly convey meaning. How fast or slow, the rate that you speak. Filler words like like, and those are usually used to save our place in a conversation so the other person doesn't jump in, but some people use them to distraction. They use them too much, and it gets in the way of the meaning of the words. Articulation and pronunciation, how correctly or crisply or clearly you say words. Do you slur or mumble? You might not be articulating well. The accent is usually associated with regions or cultures, a specific way of pronouncing words. Everyone has one, even if you don't think you do. And that says something about you as well. And even silence, the absence of sound. Silence can convey a great deal of meaning. What can it mean? Well, it can mean I'm mad at you, I'm stumped and I don't know what to say, I don't want to answer you. It could mean all of those things. So the context in which the silence occurs has to be taken into account, so you know what the person is saying without saying anything. Then we have smell. A lot of people are surprised that smell is a channel of nonverbal communication. Yes, it's known as olfactics, the study of smell. There are two very important things that are transmitted nonverbally by smell. The first one is memory and moods. We associate particular smells with particular parts of our past, both good and bad, and that can affect our mood, like the smell of cookies fresh from the oven, a bouquet of flowers, a certain perfume. And another major way in which we communicate is sexual attraction. Now, we may not necessarily think of someone's odor as the thing that attracted us to them. However, it's a very critical part of sexual attraction. We are most attracted to people who smell most differently than us. People who are similar to us genetically also smell similar, and similar genetics can lead to genetically abnormal offspring. So we are more likely to be attracted to people who smell differently because it's more likely that any offspring that we have with those people will be healthier. Didn't know that, did you? Another channel is space, known as proxemics, how we use space to communicate. In Western cultures, we have spatial zones that we prefer depending on the situation and interaction. So here they are. Intimate distance, which is, boy, you better like that person if they're that close to you, 0 to 1.5 feet. Personal distance, which is where we might have a personal conversation between 1.5 and 4 feet. Social distance, where we generally interact with people that we are either not intimate with or having a personal conversation with, which is 4 to 12 feet. And public distance, which is 12 plus feet. So think about it. What happens when we violate those implicit rules? These are definitely implicit. We've never thought about it. But yeah, if somebody gets all up in your space and you don't know them that well, how does that make you feel? So obviously that is one of the ways in which we communicate information. Another way in which we communicate is by our physical appearance. we tend to be strongly influenced by physical attractiveness. Is this fair? No, of course not. But it is human nature. And our physical appearance, not just what we look like, but how we're dressed, that kind of thing, sends messages, whether it's intentional or unintentional. There's something called the halo effect, where we tend to connect the physical attributes of a person with their competency, friendliness, social skill. So we think more attractive people are actually better people. And as I said before, judgments of attractiveness are more consistent than inconsistent, and we generally agree about how attractive people are. So this pressure that we have to be attractive, it's kind of unintentional. We're just trying to present a good appearance to the other people, but that can lead to or worsen things like eating disorders and depression. Another unusual way in which we communicate is through our use of time. Chronemics is the way that we use time to communicate. Messages that we send through our use of time are messages about what we value and about our power. We tend to spend more time on things and people that we like and care about. So giving your time to somebody or something implies that you value that person or thing. And the time of more powerful people is assumed to be more valuable than that of the time than less powerful people. So, if somebody keeps you waiting out in their waiting room, one of the messages that they are sending, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is that their time is more valuable than yours. The use of artifacts, another interesting nonverbal channel. How we use and display the things around us send powerful messages to others. So think about it. What color are the walls in your bedroom? Did you choose that color? What does it say about you? Do you have artwork or other things hanging on your walls? If you have an office, what kinds of things are in there? What kind of books are on your shelves? And when you walk into someone else's house, can you tell things about them non-verbally just by looking around at the objects and the visual features in their environment? So let's move on to how culture and sex affect nonverbal communication. We don't all behave the same ways in the same situations, and some of that has to do with the culture we identify with and our gender. So in terms of culture, nonverbal behaviors are often shaped by culture, and here are a few ways. Emblems that mean one thing in one culture may mean something very different in another culture, and some of those meanings may not be appropriate or may even be considered to be obscene. And then affect displays, how people display particular emotions, can be based on their culture. The personal distance, there are a lot of cultures where it's okay to get way up close in somebody's personal space, even if you don't know them well. Whereas in American culture, that's not cool. Eye contact. Western cultures see eye contact as a sign of honesty and credibility, but in other cultures it might be seen as an attempt at intimidation or disrespect. Even things like greeting behavior, some people use handshakes, others kisses, hugs, and their facial displays of emotion may be a little bit more muted in certain cultures than in others. Sex also or gender also influences how we are socialized to behave in gender-specific ways. Emotional expressiveness, women tend to be more expressive than men when it comes to most emotions. Not feeling, but just the expressiveness. Eye contact, touch, appearance, all those things. Men are more likely to touch women than women are to touch men. However, women touch each other more than men touch each other. It's kind of obvious. In our culture, particularly, women tend to spend more time on their personal appearance than men. I think it's because we are judged more harshly than men when it comes to appearance. So, how can we improve our nonverbal communication skills? It seems like if we do, we'll be able to enhance our ability to communicate with other people. Well, one of the things that we can do is interpret nonverbal communication. We need to be able to decode each other's nonverbal behavior by becoming more sensitive to nonverbal messages. Sure, some people are better at this than others, but everyone can learn to be more aware. Remember that the majority of information is communicated nonverbally, so pay attention to facial expressions since that's where most nonverbal communication takes place, and consider the tone of voice and the body movements of the other person as well. Do your best to try to decipher the meaning of nonverbal messages. Strive for what's called empathic accuracy, the ability to decipher nonverbal messages. Now, women tend to be better at this than men, but both genders can do it. So consider the situation. Crying doesn't always mean someone is sad. For instance, when I went to the dentist and he did some cosmetic dentistry on one of my teeth, and when he showed me what the end result was in the mirror, I burst into tears because it was so beautiful. Well, he took it the wrong way and thought that I was unhappy, so I had to let him know that no, I was very, very happy, and this was just my way of expressing myself. So that made him feel better. Keep culture in mind. Two guys greeting each other with a kiss does not necessarily mean that they are gay. It might, but it might just mean that they're from a culture where that is an acceptable form of greeting. If you're not sure, it's okay to ask for clarification. I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking what a particular nonverbal message means, and try to generate some alternate interpretations of nonverbal behavior. So expressing nonverbal messages, the more skilled you are at expressing yourself nonverbally, the better communicator you're going to be, because again, most of the message is sent nonverbally. Yes, some of us are naturally more expressive, but you can observe others to see how they do it. I like these things that you might try. Spend time with highly expressive people. If you yourself are not particularly expressive, hanging around people who are and seeing what they do. It says participate in games. I don't know, maybe theater games that exercise your nonverbal expression skills. You could do that if you want. You could take an acting class, I guess. I'm not kidding, because that actually might help you be able to express yourself nonverbally better. Once you understand the importance of nonverbal communication, then you can start to make a real effort to both try to understand it in others and utilize it in your own communication with others. This is the end of the lecture to accompany Chapter 6.